Hi everyone, my name is Mahreen and today I'll be presenting pro tips from the 2022 State of Teams report. But before I get into it, I want to tell you all a little bit about myself. I'm a psychologist and I completed my master's and my PhD in organizational psychology. My PhD investigated the development of emotional intelligence over the lifespan, over various work experiences, and across generations. When I finished my PhD, I started working at Atlassian as a people insights researcher, looking at everything from employee well-being to employee engagement to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But more than anything, I've really researched what makes teams effective, and I want to share with you some of our key learnings to help you apply them to your own teams. Our agenda for today's talk will be to first discuss what is the State of Teams report, followed by a discussion on what constitutes healthy teams, what are teamwork myths, and what are things that can sneak up and derail a healthy team. Teamwork and Atlassian go hand in hand. At Atlassian, our mission is to unleash the potential of every team. But to be able to truly unleash the potential of every team, we realized we needed to be experts in teamwork. We need to know everything there is to know about teams. And thus, the State of Teams report was born. This report aims to look at factors associated with team health like team performance, team engagement, team culture, and team sustainability and see how they trend over time. In addition to providing a framework for tracking team health over time, this report also aims to deep dive into factors that are associated with team health in order to gain a better understanding. Our methodology involves surveying at least 1,500 knowledge workers in Australia and the US at least twice a year. We aim to recruit individuals with varying ages, with various job titles, and from various locations. But one of the most important aims of our present study was to really understand what are the key ingredients of a very healthy team. But I'm sure you all have your opinions on this matter as well. I want you to take a moment and think of the best team that you ever worked for. What did they do differently, and what was it about that team that made it so good? When I think about the best team that I ever worked in, I think about a research team that I was a part of when I was in university. One thing that we did really differently is that we were always brainstorming and critiquing each other's ideas and coming up with new ideas. But the key was that we always did it in a way that was really respectful of one another. We supported each other when life got in the way of work, and more than anything, we were friends and we really enjoyed spending time with one another and chatting about things that were not work-related. The outcome of that project was really good. It was more than we had hoped for. We published our findings in a really good scientific journal, and I truly believe a big part of the success of that project was because we were such a healthy team. But I've also been on my fair share of terrible teams too. I haven't always been a part of such great teams. Early on in my career, when I started working, I was a part of a team where there was a constant undercurrent of tension. We couldn't disagree with one another without the conversation becoming heated, and I was always afraid of voicing my ideas because I thought I was going to be berated. I kept fantasizing about the day when I would be able to leave this terrible team. As you can probably tell, I wasn't putting much passion and energy into that team. My experiences, and I'm sure your experiences as well, really align with what we found in our research to be the key ingredients of healthy teams. What we did to come up with the 6 key ingredients of healthy teams is we used a fancy statistical technique known as a cluster analysis. And a cluster analysis allows us to group teams into different clusters, as you would call them. And this way we could look at the top performing teams and have a look at what characterizes those particular teams. And what we found is that the most exceptional teams all had the following things in common: psychological safety, a collaborative culture, role clarity, a culture of innovation, team task cohesion, and shared purpose. But what do each of these things mean? Psychological safety refers to feeling safe asking questions and trying new things. You feel safe speaking up when you disagree, and you're comfortable participating and expressing yourself. But most importantly, you trust that you're valued, respected, and included. Great teams also have a collaborative culture. Team members assist each other when help is needed, and they encourage each other when the going gets tough, which always happens in teamwork. There's role clarity. Each team member has a very clearly defined role, because otherwise there could be confusion and conflict. Similar to psychological safety, exceptional teams have a culture of innovation. People cooperate to help each other develop and apply new ideas. It makes sense then that these teams would be the most innovative. Great teams also have team task cohesion, which is a very researchery way of saying that team members really focus and they concentrate on their work. These teams are productive and they accomplish a lot. And finally, exceptional teams have shared purpose. They have a mission that they're all working towards and are aligned on. This mission motivates and excites them, which helps them perform at their very best. So overall, these are the 6 attributes of exceptionally healthy teams. But if I had to emphasize just one for you to take away to your own teams, it would be psychological safety, as that's definitely the most important. Now that I've gone through the state of healthy teams, I'm now going to talk about a common teamwork myth. Does location matter for teamwork? Something that everyone seems to be talking about is how much location is important for teamwork. I've seen so many media articles weighing in on the debate. Some are talking about whether teams actually need to be face-to-face for optimal teamwork, or can they work effectively in a distributed way? I'm sure you all have your opinions on this too. What we found in our research is that 68% of healthy teams are either hybrid or fully remote. Teams can be healthy wherever they work. It's not about where they work, it's about how they work. In fact, counter to conventional wisdom, what we found is that remote teams, in fact, had a higher culture of innovation than face-to-face teams. This is actually consistent with a large body of research showing that remote teams actually generate more ideas when brainstorming as compared to face-to-face teams. And this is because remote work can act as an equalizer. It's easier for everyone to participate in meetings and brainstorming and decision-making through virtual channels as compared to face-to-face, when meetings may be dominated by the loudest 1 or 2 voices. So instead of focusing on whether your team should be working face-to-face or not, it is so much more important to instead focus on those 6 elements of healthy teams that I mentioned earlier. That would go so much further in creating effective teams. So now on to teamwork derailers. Derailers are things that can sneak up and derail an otherwise healthy team. The first derailer that I'm going to talk about is burnout. It's entirely possible for a team to be very effective and to be very high performing, but to also be a very burnt out team. We normally think of burnout as an individual problem. It occurs when an individual has way too much on their plate. But sometimes the cause of burnout is not an individual having way too much on their plate. It's actually the team causing the burnout. It might be the team's culture or the team's rituals that are contributing to burnout to begin with. For example, maybe a team has a culture of working way too many hours. Maybe the team always works in evenings, maybe they work on the weekends. This makes everyone else feel like they have to do the same as well. Or maybe a team has a culture where they're working way too many meetings and this leaves little time for team members to actually do deep work. A team really needs to consider burnout as a team problem, because otherwise, if they don't consider burnout, this could really damage the culture of the team and make people want to actually leave their organization. So how do we prevent burnout? In order to prevent burnout in our teams, what teams can try is the ritual reset play from the Atlassian Playbook. This play helps audit team rituals so that teams can decide to get rid of anything that's adding unnecessary pressure. Similarly, teams should also ruthlessly prioritize. Unless it's really important or impactful, team members should just get rid of any unnecessary tasks. And finally, refresh days. Many teams at Atlassian use these to great success. They're basically a day off once a month or once a quarter where the entire team can take the day off and do anything that energizes them. I know when I have a refresh day, I take the time to go for a really long walk or read a book or hang out with friends, and these refresh days have been shown to be tremendously helpful for combating burnout. The second derailer that I'm going to mention is team incivility. We define this as anyone displaying toxic or bad apple behavior, and someone's acting this way if they're behaving rudely to other team members, if they're slacking off on their work, or if they're very frequently angry or irritated. Hands up, who here has experienced a toxic team member? Quite a lot of you. I'm sure you're all well aware of the detrimental impacts that toxic behavior can have on a team. What we found in our research is that a whopping 26% of knowledge workers report having someone like this on their team. This is so dangerous for team health, because just having one person act like this on your team could mean everyone else on the team is feeling less psychologically safe, feeling more burnt out, feeling less happy at work, and being more likely to leave their organization. My terrible team that I mentioned earlier, that was a prime example of how incivility can ruin the culture of a team. So it's so important for teams to have processes for keeping this behavior in check. One thing that teams can do is try the working agreements play from the Atlassian Playbook. This is a play that helps team members decide how they want to interact and behave with one another. So for example, team members could decide that they have rules for not messaging each other outside of work hours. But it's not just our team's responsibility to keep incivility in check. It's also our own. I'm sure there have all been times where we've inadvertently been uncivil to our team members, but it's so important for us to be self-reflective and consider the impacts that our behavior is having on our broader team. By being self-aware and self-reflective, we're one step closer to creating happy and healthier teams. But what to do if you're in a situation where you're in a team where someone is actually ruining the health of your team? If you're in this situation, the most effective thing that you can do is actually try and speak up and change the situation. But you can only do this if you're feeling psychologically safe. What you could do is suggest a team health retro in order to surface some of the challenges that your team is facing. And this might be an avenue for other people on your team to actually say that they're facing similar concerns. But if you're not feeling psychologically safe in actually voicing your concerns, or if you've voiced your concerns and they're not being heard, the most optimal thing that you can do for your own well-being is to actually try and change the situation by leaving your team. It's unfortunate if it comes down to it, but that's the best thing that you can do, because otherwise you're in a situation that just leads to frustration, resentment, and burnout. So basically, the most effective things that you can do for yourself when you're faced with toxic behavior is to actually try and change the situation, or if all else fails, actually try and leave the situation. The final derailer that I'm going to discuss is the flight risk. The flight risk is a team member who wants to leave the company as they're looking for greener pastures. From all the stories of the Great Resignation, we actually found that leaders were indeed thinking about quitting in increasing numbers. This is really problematic because if one individual leaves their organization, they actually take all of their knowledge with them. We also find that when one person on a team leaves the company, everyone else on the team actually starts thinking about quitting as well. So it's really important for team members and managers to regularly check in with one another just to make sure everyone is as happy as they can be. A happy team is a healthy team. Overall, these are the basics of the science of teamwork. Healthy teams are characterized by psychological safety, a collaborative culture, a culture of innovation, role clarity, team task cohesion, and shared purpose. They're not excessively worried about whether their team needs to be face-to-face to be healthy, and they monitor for signs of incivility, burnout, and people leaving. By knowing the basics, any team can go from good to great. But you can't change what you don't measure. For example, it would be hard for me to know for sure if I'm losing weight if I'm not actually tracking the numbers on the scale. Teams need to measure their levels of team health just to be sure that they're tracking well and that they're improving. At Atlassian, we conduct monthly pulse surveys looking at team well-being, team engagement, and team effectiveness. And what we found is that teams that engage with these surveys to a greater extent actually improve more rapidly on their team's health than teams that, look at their team's health less frequently. And that's because they're keeping team health front of mind. By using resources like the Team Health Monitor or Team Pulse surveys, like we do at Atlassian, you can be much more confident of your team's progress on team health. So overall, what can you do as a leader to build healthier teams? As we just discussed, it's so important to measure team health through pulse surveys or the health monitor, and this can be done either quarterly or monthly. Activities such as this can give you ideas for which areas your team needs to focus on. Second, promoting healthy team attributes like the ones I have been mentioning: psychological safety, a collaborative culture, role clarity, a culture of innovation, team task cohesion, and shared purpose. Lastly, it's also important to watch out for team derailers: burnout, incivility, and flight risks. Building a healthy team doesn't happen overnight. It takes lots of time, energy, and patience, but the payoff on having healthy teams in your business is so worth it. At Atlassian, we've done so much research into what makes teams effective, but we haven't just done the research. We also have so many plays and resources to help you. For more information on team plays and practices, please visit the Atlassian Playbook website. Also, keep an eye out for our State of Teams report. Our existing State of Teams report is up online, but keep an eye out for our next one, which is coming out in November. Now we've got time for questions. There's going to be a mic runner for anyone that has a question. I'm just going to put on my headphones because my earpiece came out.
For teams who have experienced incivility and that was like a prior culture for them, what have you found to be the most effective mechanism for changing that?
To be honest, it's actually when there's accountability for that uncivil behavior. So it's really important when there's uncivil behavior in a team for the manager to step up and say that this behavior is not okay. When people realize that their actions have consequences, like it's going to negatively affect them in their performance review or maybe potentially affect their bonus, it's sad to say, but sometimes that's what it takes for people to actually change their behavior. So what I would really recommend is for the manager to be really on board in keeping that behavior in check. Thanks for your question.
Hi, Maureen. Are there different drivers of burnout if you're a leader versus if you're an individual contributor?
That's a really interesting question. So definitely there are differences between leaders and individual contributors. So sometimes part of the challenge of being a leader is actually being in way too many meetings, because you could be managing a really large team. And what we found is that leaders who are stretched across too many direct reports and have way too many meetings, that could be a prime factor in them being burnt out. Whereas maybe more for an IC, maybe it's more so having really difficult deadlines and they can't actually manage their time effectively because potentially maybe their manager has given them unrealistic expectations. So if we want to solve for burnout, we definitely need to consider that managers might have different problems to ICs. Thank you.
Hi. At one point, I was actually managing a team, and I was being extremely civil and trying to encourage development. A lot of people did not believe me. It's like, okay, you're my manager, and maybe just too extreme in that case. So, how do you handle those scenarios? Like, people are used to maybe some kind of incivility to some extent. Anyway, just
That's a really interesting question. I think what we've found in so much psychological research is it actually takes time for people to get used to change. If people have had a history of always experiencing incivility, it's going to take them time to be actually used to a manager that's not like that. It takes time for people to build their sense of trust again. So what I would recommend is that you give them time, you show them that you're really consistent, you really do believe in their development, and over time they're going to get used to that new normal, and soon in turn they're going to think uncivility is actually the exception and not the norm. So I would really encourage you to be patient and let them see that you're genuine.
Hey, Maureen. So all really good information you shared. Just curious, from the latest State of Teams report, if there was anything that maybe you and the team had hypothesized as being the case or would be the state of the research, but that actually proved to be surprising. Something that was maybe you didn't think would be the case, but you learned through the data that there was something that stood out that maybe was against expectations.
Thank you, that's a great question. I think over time when we were doing these State of Teams reports, one of the things that we were really interested in was the difference between remote teams, hybrid teams, and face-to-face teams. And what I had hypothesized in my head internally at least was that there would probably be not too many differences between the teams, because I do believe that healthy teams can be very effective when they're working remotely. But what I found really unexpected was the finding that I'd mentioned earlier, is that remote teams actually have a higher culture of innovation as compared to some of the other teams, because what we see in some other research, like some research done by Microsoft, what is a potential danger of remote work is that work can get more siloed, where you start working increasingly within your department and there's less cross-department collaboration, which could hamper innovation. So whilst that definitely may be the case with remote work, there's less cross-department collaboration, at least within the team, there's definitely more brainstorming and coming up with new ideas, which I think is a really cool upside of remote work. And I think the explanations given by a lot of researchers as to why this may be the case, that it's easier when you're working remotely for everybody to have a voice as compared to one or two people dominating the conversation, which can happen when it's face-to-face. I personally found that really interesting and really surprising.
You talked about teams need to be measuring things. So can you tell us more about what managers and companies should be looking at to measure what a healthy team is?
Sounds good. So I can briefly discuss our approach at Atlassian, where our team pulse surveys actually look at a number of different things. We look at the levels of well-being that every individual is experiencing. To what extent are they excited about the work that they're doing? To what extent are they burnt out? So we also look at individual attributes just to make sure everyone is happy, everyone is healthy, they're not feeling burnt out. But then we look at those key indicators of healthy teams, like, do you feel psychologically safe? Are diverse perspectives encouraged? Do you have a culture of innovation by having new ideas? Is there alignment between the work that you're doing and the work that the rest of the team is doing? So we have questions that look at team well-being, questions that look at team engagement, and questions that look at team effectiveness, because if a team is unhealthy, there could be a million different reasons why that team is unhealthy, and all the reasons could be very different. Maybe for one team, they are very coordinated with one another and they have really good communication channels, but maybe that team is a very burnt out team. Or maybe you have another team, they're not burnt out at all, but they're not motivated because they're not excited about the work that their team is doing. So there's some mission building that needs to happen in that team. Or maybe you have a great team that's, they do business as usual, but they don't come up with new ideas, they're not brainstorming, and thus they're not coming up with innovative solutions to things. So I think it's really important to have a comprehensive assessment of team health. That way you can really pinpoint, what is my team excelling at and what is my team not doing so good at?
Hi. So you talked about the importance of psychological safety for team performance. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the ways that we, either as leaders or individual contributors, can help boost psychological safety in our teams?
Yeah, totally. One thing that we find really boosts psychological safety is, interestingly enough, really listening to one another. Having empathetic, active listening is a skill, but when team members are really good at listening to one another, regardless of what the other person is saying, that can really boost psychological safety. Other things that have been shown to be really helpful for boosting psychological safety are those instances of team building activities where you get to know everyone and you start feeling connected and you start trusting one another. When you trust your team members and you feel like you know them on a deeper level, you're more likely to feel psychologically safe. But I guess the most important thing is to really watch out for communication. When disagreeing with one another, make sure you're disagreeing about the actual work and you're not becoming heated, you're not attributing anything to the person. Like if you're a manager and you're unhappy with the work that somebody has produced, make sure you're not saying that it's about you as an individual. It's about, these are the things about the work that you think maybe could be improved, etc. They're all little things that we can each do to really build psychological safety, but I would emphasize really allowing people to speak up, not critiquing the actual person, keeping the critique focused on work, active listening, really getting to know one another and really trying to build trust within the team, and those things should really build psychological safety.
Hi, I'm wondering what you're interested in learning next. What are some unanswered questions that you're curious about?
Thank you, great question. So one of the things I was really excited, and actually we have covered in our next State of Teams report, so the findings will come out in November, but I remember when we did our previous wave of State of Teams, I was really interested in the intersection between imposter syndrome and team health. So there's a lot of literature that some people feel as though despite all their achievements that their success is due to luck, and this can actually be quite common, especially in the tech world. So I was really interested to see that intersection. Does imposter syndrome affect team health? And conversely, do the ways your team members interact with you, could that affect your imposter syndrome? Like if your team members are very appreciative, could that affect how you feel about yourself? So I think given that we're all individuals working in teams, it's important to consider all the various ways our behaviours in a team could actually impact, how you view yourself.
Have you done any research where you've compared different factors that are due to geographical differences, where one derailer is more prominent in another geography than another?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So usually when we do our overarching state of teams report, we actually aggregate across Australia and the US. We do find some differences sometimes between what's happening in Australia and what's happening in US. Like in one of our earlier reports, burnout was actually higher in the US as compared to Australia. So some of those things can be quite interesting. But I think there's a lot of commonalities as well between Australia and the US. And what we see from other research is that there could be more cross-cultural differences, but maybe that's for a later wave, as currently we're looking at Australia and the US, but I think it would be fascinating to actually explore team effectiveness in other geographies as well. I think we're out of time if I'm looking at the timer correctly, so thank you everyone for listening. I really appreciate it.